The autumn wind carried more dust than promise as it swept across the platform of dusty Ford Station. Maeve O'Rourke stood motionless amid the swirl of grit and departing passengers, her gloved fingers clutching a letter that had begun to feel heavier than her traveling trunk. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden planks, and somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed its harsh greeting to the New Mexico territory. She had imagined this moment differently during the long journey from Boston, pictured herself stepping gracefully from the stagecoach into the waiting arms of prosperity, if not affection. Bartholomew Pike's letters had painted a picture of a thriving ranch, of a partnership that would benefit them both, a business arrangement. He'd called it, though dressed in the respectable clothes of matrimony. After what had happened with Charles, she'd thought it the perfect solution, a marriage of convenience where touching would be limited to the joining of hands at the altar. But no one waited for her. The station master, a weathered man with kind eyes, approached after watching her stand there for the better part of an hour. "Miss, you expecting someone?"
"Mr. Pike,"
she said, lifting her chin despite the tremor in her voice.
"From the Double Bar Ranch. He was to send someone."
The man's expression shifted, something unreadable passing across his features. "Pike, you say well now." He scratched his jaw, avoiding her gaze.
"Haven't seen any of his boys today?"
"Course, the road to Double Bar's been giving folks trouble. Washout from the summer rains." Before Maeve could respond, a shadow fell across the platform. She turned to find a man dismounting from a dust-colored horse, his movements efficient despite an almost imperceptible stiffness in his left leg. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate simple, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sage. "Tom," he said to the station master, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was low, roughened by dust or disuse. "Picking up supplies for Cedar Draw." His gaze shifted to Maeve, taking in her traveling dress, the trunk, the letter still visible in her hand. "Ma'am." "Jack Calder," the station master said by way of introduction, seeming relieved. "This here's Miss O'Rourke. She's expected at the Double Bar, but seems there's been some confusion." Jack's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Road's out," he said after a pause. "Won't be passable for days, maybe a week." Maeve felt the ground shift beneath her feet, though she kept her composure. A week. She had precisely enough money for 2 nights at a boarding house, having spent nearly everything on the journey west. Pride warred with practicality as she considered her options. "Is there another route?" she asked. "Not unless you fancy swimming your horse through Skeleton Creek." He studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "I'm heading back to Cedar Draw. It's halfway between here and Double Bar. You could stay the night. Send word to Pike in the morning." The station master cleared his throat. "That's kind of you, Jack." But Maeve hesitated. She'd learned the hard way that kindness from strange men often came with a price. Yet what choice did she have? The sun was already beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "I can pay," she said firmly. "No need." Jack was already lifting her trunk, handling it easily despite its weight. "Wouldn't be Christian to leave a lady stranded." The ride to Cedar Draw took them through country that seemed to exist at the edge of the world. Red earth stretched endlessly beneath a sky so vast it made Maeve dizzy to look at it. Scrub brush and twisted juniper dotted the landscape, and in the distance, mesas rose like ancient sentinels. The only sounds were the steady clop of hooves and the lonely wind. Jack rode slightly ahead, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. He'd offered her his horse while he walked, but she'd insisted on riding the gentle mare he'd borrowed from the livery. They didn't speak much, which suited Maeve fine. She was too busy fighting the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. What if Pike had changed his mind? What if this had all been some cruel joke? As if sensing her distress, Jack slowed his horse until they rode side by side. "Storm coming," he said, nodding toward the horizon where dark clouds massed. "We'll make it before it hits."
"How can you tell?"
"Wind's changed. Smell it." She inhaled deeply, catching the faint scent of rain mixed with sage. It was so different from Boston's coal smoke and sea salt.
"Yes."
"First lesson of the territory," he said. "Read the weather or it'll read you." They reached Cedar Draw as the first fat raindrops began to fall. The ranch was modest, a main house of adobe and timber, a barn, a few outbuildings, all of it looking well-maintained but worn. No hands came to greet them, and Maeve realized Jack ran the place alone. He helped her down from the mare, careful not to touch more than her elbow and hand.
"House is through here,"
he said, grabbing her trunk. "You'll have the back room. It's not much, but it's clean." The interior was sparse but neat, a main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs. A narrow hallway led to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything spoke of a man who lived simply and expected little. "Are you hungry?" he asked, setting her trunk in the small back room. "I've got beans and salt pork, some bread from yesterday." "That would be kind. Thank you." She removed her gloves, trying not to think about how her stomach had been gnawing at itself for hours. While he prepared the meal, she unpacked a few necessities and tried to calm her racing thoughts. The room was indeed clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and hooks on the wall for clothes. A faded quilt covered the bed, its pattern still visible despite years of washing. When she emerged, Jack had set 2 plates on the table and was pouring coffee from a blue enamel pot. They ate in companionable silence, the rain now drumming steadily on the roof. The food was plain but filling, and the coffee strong enough to strip paint. "I'll ride to town in the morning," he said finally. "Send word to Pike that you're here."
"I appreciate that."
She hesitated, then asked, "Do you know Mr. Pike well?" Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well enough." Something in his tone suggested further questions would be unwelcome, so she changed the subject.
"How long have you had Cedar Draw?"
3 years. Bought it after I mustered out." He didn't elaborate on from where, but she'd noticed the military precision in his movements, the way he constantly checked the windows and doors. "It's a good piece of land," she offered. "When it rains." He stood, collecting their plates, which isn't often enough. She rose to help, but he waved her off. "You've had a long journey. Rest." But sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the narrow bed, listening to the rain and the unfamiliar night sounds, coyotes yipping in the distance, the wind moaning through the eaves. In Boston, there had always been the comfort of gas lamps and neighbors, the steady clip-clop of horses on cobblestones. Here, the darkness was absolute, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning. Sometime near midnight, she heard Jack moving around. Then the creak of the front door. Through her window, she could see him standing on the porch, a rifle cradled in his arms, standing guard. She realized. Over her, the gesture should have been comforting, but instead, it reminded her of how vulnerable she was alone in a strange land with a man she didn't know, waiting for another man she'd never met to claim her like a package from the freight company. She touched the bruise on her wrist, now faded to yellow-green, the last reminder of Charles's temper. He'd seemed so charming at first, so respectable. Everyone in Boston society had said what a catch he was, how lucky she was to have attracted his attention. No one had seen what happened behind closed doors, and when she'd tried to tell them, no one had believed her. A gentleman like Charles Wellington would never raise a hand to a lady. They'd said. The scandal, when she'd finally broken the engagement, had ruined her. No decent man in Boston would have her now, not after the whispers and speculation. Pike's advertisement in the Matrimonial Times had seemed like salvation, a chance to start fresh where no one knew her shame. Thunder rumbled overhead, and she pulled the quilt higher. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow Pike would send someone, and this strange interlude would end. She'd become Mrs. Bartholomew Pike, mistress of the Double Bar Ranch. And if the marriage bed remained cold, well, that was a price she was willing to pay for safety and respectability. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, it wasn't Pike she dreamed of, but sage green eyes and careful hands, and a voice saying, "Wouldn't be Christian to leave a lady stranded." Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh light of day and the realization that the rain had turned the desert into a sea of mud. Jack was already up, coffee made and bacon frying when she emerged.
"Road'll be worse now,"
he said without preamble.
"but I'll try to get through to town."
She watched him saddle his horse, noting the careful way he moved, as if old injuries still pained him. When he mounted up, she found herself standing on the porch, twisting her hands in her skirts. "Mr. Calder," she called. He turned in the saddle. "Thank you for your kindness." Something shifted in his expression, a softness that made him look younger. "Just being neighborly, Miss O'Rourke." Then he was gone, swallowed by the vast landscape, and Maeve was alone with her doubts and the endless sky. She pressed her hand to the letter in her pocket, Pike's promises crinkling under her fingers. Soon, she told herself, soon this uncertainty would end. But as she watched a hawk circle overhead, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was just beginning. 3 days passed like seasons in the desert, dry and full of waiting. Maeve had taken to standing on the porch each evening, watching the road that led to town, willing a rider to appear with news from Pike. But the horizon remained empty save for the occasional tumbleweed and the ever-present hawks circling overhead. Jack returned each day from his work around the ranch, dusty and tired, with the same words, "No message yet." On the 4th morning, young Eli Hart appeared at Cedar Draw, his mule looking as dejected as the boy himself. Eli couldn't have been more than 14, all knees and elbows. With a shock of red hair that refused to stay under his cap, he served as the informal mail carrier for the outlying ranches, making his rounds when he wasn't helping his widowed mother with their small farm. "Mr. Calder," Eli said, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "I got something to tell you about Miss O'Rourke's situation." Jack set down the harness he'd been mending. "Out with it, boy." Eli glanced at Maeve, who had emerged from the house at the sound of voices. "That message about the road being washed out, Wade Morrison told me to spread that around."
"Said Mr. Pike didn't want—"
He swallowed hard.
"Said he didn't want any trouble brought to his door."
The silence that followed was deafening. Maeve felt the blood drain from her face, her hands clenching in the folds of her skirt. There was no washout. "No, ma'am. Road's been clear all along." Jack's expression darkened like the storm clouds that had brought the rain. "Morrison threatened you." "Eli." The boy nodded miserably.
"Said my mama might have trouble getting credit at the company store if I didn't do what he said. I'm sorry, Miss O'Rourke. I'm real sorry."
"It's not your fault," Maeve said, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. She fumbled in her pocket and pressed a coin into Eli's hand. "Thank you for telling the truth." After the boy left, Maeve sank onto the porch step, her mind racing. Pike had deliberately left her stranded. But why? What had changed between his last letter and her arrival? "I'll take you to town," Jack said quietly. "Mrs. Gustafson runs a clean boarding house. You can stay there while you sort things out." Maeve looked up at him, seeing her own suspicions reflected in his eyes. They both knew what this meant. Pike had taken her money and left her high and dry. The boarding house would eat through her remaining funds in days. And then what? She had no return ticket, no family to wire for help. "I can't," she admitted, the words bitter as alkali water. "I don't have enough money for more than 2 nights, maybe 3. Jack was quiet for a long moment, studying the horizon. Then he surprised her. "You can stay here, work for your keep until you figure out your next move." "Work?" She almost laughed. What did she know of ranch work? She could embroider and play piano, organize dinner parties, and manage household accounts. But none of those skills seemed particularly useful in this harsh landscape. Can you cook? After a fashion. Can you read and figure? Of course. Then you can help with the books. Ranch accounts are a mess. I've got no head for numbers. You cook, help with the ledgers. Maybe tend the chickens. In exchange, room and board until you decide what to do. It was charity dressed up as employment, and they both knew it. But what choice did she have? Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. All right, she said, but only until I can contact Mr. Pike directly and resolve this misunderstanding. Jack's mouth tightened at the word misunderstanding, but he only nodded. Fair enough. And so began Maeve's education in the realities of ranch life. That first morning, Jack showed her around the property, the chicken coop with its dozen scraggly hens, the vegetable garden withering in the drought, the well that needed constant attention to keep flowing. Water's everything out here, he explained, demonstrating how to work the pump. Lose your water, lose your land. The kitchen was basic but functional, with a wood-burning stove that seemed to have a mind of its own. Her first attempt at biscuits produced rocks hard enough to drive fence posts. Jack ate them anyway, without complaint, though she noticed he dunked them in his coffee for a very long time. They'll do, was all he said, but she caught the ghost of a smile. The ledgers were indeed a disaster. Jack had apparently been stuffing receipts and bills into a wooden box for months, hoping they would somehow sort themselves out. Maeve spent hours at the kitchen table, organizing papers by date and type, trying to make sense of the ranch's finances. You're barely breaking even, she told him one evening as they shared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, much improved from her first attempt. The drought's hitting you hard. Tell me something I don't know. You're also being overcharged for supplies. Henderson's store is billing you nearly double what these goods should cost. Jack's jaw tightened. Henderson extends credit. Not many will. Not to. He stopped himself. Not to what? Nothing, just the way things are. But Maeve was beginning to understand. She'd noticed how some of the townspeople looked at Jack when he went to town. The way conversations died when he entered a room. There was a story there. Something about his past that made him an outsider. The days fell into a rhythm. Morning started before dawn. Jack heading out to check the cattle while Maeve tended the chickens and started breakfast. The hens, initially suspicious of her, gradually accepted her presence, especially after she discovered they liked table scraps. She named them after Boston society matrons, finding perverse pleasure in watching Mrs. Astor scratch in the dirt. Afternoons were for the endless chores that kept a ranch running, mending, washing, hauling water. Maeve's soft hands soon sprouted blisters, then calluses. Her fine dresses, completely unsuitable for ranch work, were relegated to the back of the wardrobe. Jack wordlessly left some old shirts and a pair of canvas pants outside her door one day. They had belonged to a smaller man, she didn't ask who, and with some alteration. They served in the evenings. They often sat on the porch, watching the sun paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sometimes they talked careful conversations about safe topics like the weather or the ranch. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. It was on such an evening that Maeve finally worked up the courage to write to Pike directly. She chose her words carefully, maintaining a respectful tone despite her growing anger. Mr. Pike, she wrote. I arrived in Dusty Ford on the date specified in your last correspondence, but found no one to meet me. I understand there may have been some confusion regarding my arrival. I am currently residing at Cedar Draw Ranch and would appreciate clarification of your intentions regarding our arrangement. If you have reconsidered, I ask only for reimbursement of my travel expenses so that I may make other arrangements. Please respond at your earliest convenience. She gave the letter to Eli on his next visit, along with her last $1 to ensure delivery. I'll put it right in Pike's hands. The boy promised, even if Morrison tries to stop me. The waiting began again, but this time Maeve had less hope and more dread. She threw herself into ranch work, learning to patch fences and doctor minor wounds on livestock. Jack was a patient teacher, never mocking her ignorance or clumsiness. One afternoon, a dust storm blew in without warning. They were out checking on a pregnant cow when the sky turned an ominous yellow-brown.
"Get to the barn,"
Jack shouted over the rising wind. They ran, but the storm caught them halfway. The wind drove sand and grit with stinging force, turning the world into a brown nightmare. Maeve lost her bearings immediately, panic rising as she couldn't see more than a foot ahead. Then Jack's hand found hers, strong and sure.
"This way."
He pulled her against him, shielding her with his body as he guided them to shelter. They stumbled into the barn, gasping and coughing, covered head to toe in dust. In the dim light filtering through the cracks, they looked like ghosts of themselves.
"Are you hurt?"
Jack asked, his hands hovering near her shoulders, not quite touching. "No, She started to laugh, surprising them both. "I must look a fright."
"You look—"
He stopped, something flickering in his eyes.
"You look fine."
There was a moment, brief as a heartbeat, where the air between them crackled with possibility. Then a terrible bellowing split the air, the pregnant cow, distressed by the storm. The moment shattered. Jack turned to the cow. All business again. "She's in trouble. Calf's coming early." What followed was Maeve's initiation into the messier realities of ranch life. She held the lantern and handed Jack what he needed as he worked to help the struggling cow. It took hours, well into the night, but finally, a wet, wobbly calf slipped into the world. "There now," Jack murmured to the exhausted mother. "You did good." Maeve watched him tend to both mother and baby with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his usual taciturn manner. When he glanced up and caught her staring, she looked away quickly. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Couldn't have done it alone. I didn't do much."
"You stayed. That's something."
As they walked back to the house through the now quiet night, Maeve realized something had shifted. She was no longer just marking time at Cedar Draw. She was becoming part of it, part of this harsh but honest life. The thought should have frightened her. This wasn't what she'd planned, wasn't the security she'd sought. But as she bid Jack good night and retired to her room, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow's challenges. Whatever Pike's answer or lack thereof, she was no longer the same woman who had stood on that train platform, clutching her letters and dreams. She was stronger now, strong enough, perhaps, to face whatever came next. The lamp flame flickered as she prepared for bed, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, the sound no longer frightening but simply part of the night music of her new world. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, it always did out here, but tonight she had helped bring new life into the world. It was, she thought as sleep claimed her, a good day's work. The rhythms of Cedar Draw had become as familiar to Maeve as her own heartbeat. 6 weeks had passed since her arrival, and the woman who now strode across the ranch yard in worn canvas pants bore little resemblance to the Boston lady who had stepped off the stage in silk and expectations. Morning came with its usual demands. Jack was already out checking the fence line when Maeve heard the first howl. She froze, coffee pot in hand, as the sound was answered by another, then another. Wolves. She found Jack by the eastern pasture, his rifle ready, studying tracks in the dust. "Pack's been circling for days," he said without turning, "drought's pushing them closer. The sheep moved them to the near pen last night, but wolves are patient. They'll wait for a mistake." That afternoon, they worked together reinforcing the sheep pen, driving posts deeper and stringing extra wire. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Maeve paused frequently to wipe sweat from her brow. She'd learned to read the signs of heat exhaustion, to pace herself through the brutal afternoon hours. "You're getting the hang of it," Jack observed, watching her work the wire stretcher with newfound confidence.
"I had a good teacher,"
she replied, then felt heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. They finished as shadows lengthened across the ranch. Together, they stood surveying their work, shoulders almost touching. The moment stretched, comfortable and charged at once. "I'll take first watch tonight," Jack said finally. "We'll take turns," Maeve countered. "I can handle a rifle now, thanks to you." He looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. "Wake me at midnight." But midnight brought more than a changing of the guard. The wolves came in force, shadows flowing like water over the desert floor. Maeve's shout brought Jack running from the house, and together they faced the pack. The next minutes were a blur of snarling shapes and gunfire. Maeve's hands were steady on the rifle, her shots careful and deliberate as Jack had taught her. The wolves tested their defenses, looking for weakness, finding none. When the alpha finally called retreat with a long, mournful howl, Maeve realized she was trembling, not with fear, but with the fierce exhilaration of having stood her ground. "You did good," Jack said, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. "Real good." The praise warmed her more than it should have. News from town came irregularly to Cedar Draw, usually through Eli or the occasional passing rider. It was through such channels that Maeve learned Pike's grip on the territory was tightening. Mrs. Gustafson's boarding house had closed after Pike bought her mortgage and called it due. The Hendersons at the general store now refused credit to anyone Pike marked as trouble. "He's squeezing folks out," Sam Trujillo told them one day when he stopped by to water his small herd. "The Kowalskis are talking about heading back east. Can't make it without credit." Maeve felt a cold anger building in her chest. She'd written Pike twice more, each letter more direct than the last. The silence was answer enough. He'd taken her money and washed his hands of her. "Why doesn't someone stand up to him?" she asked after Sam left. Jack was cleaning his rifle. Movements precise and automatic. Pike holds paper on half the territory. Cross him, lose your land. Simple as that. "It's not right." Lot of things aren't right, doesn't change them. But Maeve had been raised on Boston politics, had watched her father navigate the treacherous waters of city commerce. She understood leverage and pressure points, even if the battlefield here was sage and sand instead of parlors and meeting rooms. It was this understanding that sparked an idea when Father Malloy visited the following Sunday. The priest made rounds to the outlying ranches once a month, bringing communion and news to those who couldn't make it to town. "The church roof needs repair before winter," Father Malloy mentioned over the simple lunch Maeve had prepared. "But the funds aren't there. Pike was our largest donor, but he's withdrawn his support." "Why?" Maeve asked. The priest shifted uncomfortably. "I spoke against some of his recent business practices. From the pulpit, he took exception." Jack snorted. "Bet he did." After the priest left, Maeve stood at the kitchen window, watching dust devils dance across the yard. An idea was forming, dangerous and possibly foolish, but an idea nonetheless. "What if people didn't need Pike's credit?" she said suddenly. Jack looked up from the ledger he'd been reviewing. "What do you mean? What if there was another way, a cooperative, perhaps people pooling resources, extending credit to each other instead of relying on one man's whims? Takes money to start something like that. Money folks don't have. But they have other things. The Kowalskis have those milk cows. Sam raises the best horses in the territory. Mrs. Reyes makes preserves that could sell in any city. What if instead of money, people traded goods and services?" Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've thought about this." "I've had time to think," she admitted. "And I'm tired of watching good people get crushed by one man's greed." "It's not your fight." "Isn't it?" She turned to face him fully. "Pike brought me here under false pretenses, took my money, left me stranded, and I'm luckier than most I've found." She paused, suddenly aware of what she'd been about to say. "I found shelter. Others won't be so fortunate." That night, the temperature dropped unexpectedly. By morning, Frost silvered the ground, beautiful and deadly to the struggling garden. They worked quickly to cover what they could, their breath misting in the cold air. "It's too early for this," Jack muttered, wrapping burlap around the tomato plants. "Nothing's predictable out here," Maeve replied, unconsciously echoing something he'd told her weeks ago. They saved what they could, but the damage was done. Half the garden was lost, vegetables they'd counted on for winter provisions. As they surveyed the damage, standing close together in the cold morning air, Jack surprised her by taking her hand. "We'll make do," he said quietly. "Always have." His hand was calloused and warm, and Maeve found herself gripping back, drawing strength from the simple contact, when he realized what he'd done. He started to pull away, but she held on. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for taking me in when you didn't have to, for teaching me, for—" She struggled for words. "For treating me like a person, not a problem to be solved or a possession to be claimed." Something shifted in his expression, walls crumbling just a little. "Maeve." But whatever he might have said was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. They stepped apart quickly, old habits of propriety asserting themselves. 3 riders approached, and Maeve recognized Wade Morrison's bulky form in the lead. Her stomach tightened as the men reined up just outside the yard. "Calder," Morrison called, not bothering to dismount. "Mr. Pike sends his regards." "I doubt that," Jack replied evenly. Morrison's smile was unpleasant. "He also sends a message. Seems the note on your land is coming due soon. Real soon. He wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten." "Not due for 6 months," Jack said, but Maeve heard the tension in his voice. "Terms can change, fine print and all. You might want to review your papers." Morrison's eyes found Maeve. "As for you, Mr. Pike says to tell you he received your letters. The answer is no. To all of it. You made your choice when you took up with this saddle tramp. Bed you made, so to speak." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Jack took a step forward, but Maeve caught his arm. "Tell Mr. Pike," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of her Boston upbringing, "that I'll be consulting with the territorial attorney about our contract. Written agreements are binding, even out here." Morrison laughed. "You do that, lady. See how far it gets you." He wheeled his horse around. 6 months, Calder, maybe less. Be ready." After they left, Jack stood rigid, staring at the dust of their departure. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You shouldn't have to hear such things." "I've heard worse," Maeve said quietly. "In finer company, with prettier words. At least Morrison's honest in his crudeness." That evening, as they shared a meager supper of beans and preserved vegetables, the kitchen felt smaller somehow. The lamp cast a warm circle of light, holding back the darkness, and in that glow, walls continued to crumble. "I was at Washita River," Jack said suddenly, "with the 7th Cavalry." Maeve set down her fork carefully. She knew of Washita River, everyone did. The dawn attack on the Cheyenne camp, the controversy that followed. "I followed orders," he continued, staring at his plate. "Did things that needed doing. They said, for the greater good. They said." He looked up finally, eyes haunted. "Came back here trying to build something clean, something honest. But the past has long shadows." "We all have shadows," Maeve said softly. "I was engaged to a man everyone said was perfect, charming, wealthy, from a good family. No one believed me when I tried to tell them what he was really like. When I finally broke it off, I was the one blamed. The difficult woman who couldn't appreciate what she had." She pulled back her sleeve slightly, showing the faint scar on her wrist. "This was his goodbye gift. Said if he couldn't have me, no one could. I left Boston that same night." Jack's jaw tightened. He's still breathing. "Far as I know, married the Whitman girl 2 months after I left. I pity her." They sat in silence for a moment, two damaged souls recognizing each other across the table.
"Is that why?" Jack asked finally. "Why you flinch when someone moves too quick?"
"Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. "I thought if I could just start over somewhere new, somewhere far from all of it." "The shadows follow," Jack finished. "I know." The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Inside, the kitchen felt like a sanctuary, warm and safe despite all the threats gathering around them. Maeve stood and moved to the stove, pouring fresh coffee with hands that hardly trembled at all. When she turned back, Jack was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "When I saw you on that platform, all Boston Polish and proper manners, I figured you'd last maybe a week out here. What do you think now?" He stood slowly, crossed to where she stood by the stove. For a moment they were close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, could smell the leather and sage that always clung to him. "I think," he said slowly, "that you're probably the strongest person I've ever met." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Maeve felt her heart racing, but not with fear. This was something else, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Jack," she breathed, and saw her own tumult reflected in his eyes. He lifted a hand, slowly enough that she could pull away if she chose. Instead, she stayed still as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers barely grazing her skin. "We should be careful," he said, voice rough. "Both of us have been hurt. Both of us have reasons to—" "To what?" she challenged softly. "To not trust, to not hope, to not feel." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "To not make promises we might not be able to keep." She leaned into his touch, just slightly, savoring the warmth. "Then let's not make promises. Let's just be." For a long moment they stood there, balanced on the edge of something new. Then Jack stepped back, hand dropping to his side. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we start bringing the cattle closer. Going to be a long day." She nodded, understanding the withdrawal, even respecting it. They were both too scarred to rush into anything, too aware of how badly things could go wrong. But as she prepared for bed that night, Maeve allowed herself a small smile. The wall between them had cracked, not shattered, that would take time and trust and patience, but cracked enough to let in light. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song across the desert. Inside, two wounded souls began the slow, careful dance of learning to hope again. She refused to be touched again until a stranger's gaze consumed her with wild desire. The words came unbidden to her mind, and she pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering the near touch, the almost kiss. Not yet, she thought, but someday, when they were both ready, when touch could mean healing instead of harm. Someday. The morning Wade Morrison returned to Cedar Draw. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with storms that refused to break. Maeve was collecting eggs when she heard the horses, too many horses for a social call. Her hand stilled on the basket as 4 riders appeared through the gate, Morrison at their head like a bad penny turned up again. Jack emerged from the barn, deliberately setting down his tools before walking toward the house. His movements were unhurried, but Maeve saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand stayed close to his hip despite no weapon being visible. "Calder," Morrison called out, not bothering to dismount. "Got business with your house guest." "State it from there," Jack replied, positioning himself between the riders and the house. Morrison's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Mr. Pikes reconsidered the lady's situation. Seems he's willing to honor the original arrangement after all. Come to collect what's his." "I'm no man's property," Maeve said, stepping out from the chicken coop. She kept her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "And Mr. Pike forfeited any claim when he failed to meet his obligations. Way he sees it, you're the one who broke the deal, taking up residence with another man. Morrison's eyes raked over her working clothes with obvious disgust. Playing house with a killer don't void a contract. The word killer hung in the air like a curse. Maeve saw Jack's jaw tighten, but he didn't rise to the bait. You need to leave, Jack said quietly. Now. Or what you'll add us to your body count. Morrison laughed, ugly and sharp. Boys, maybe we should explain the situation more clearly. The riders started to spread out, hands drifting toward weapons. Maeve's mouth went dry. They were outnumbered, and she'd left the rifle inside the house. That's far enough. Sam Trujillo's voice came from behind the barn, followed by the man himself, rifle cradled casually in his arms. Two of his sons flanked him, similarly armed. From the other direction, the Kowalski brothers emerged, their faces set in grim determination. Seems you boys got lost, Sam continued conversationally. This here's private property. Morrison's confidence faltered. This ain't your concern. Trujillo. Man threatens my neighbors. It becomes my concern. Sam's weathered face was impassive. Besides, my Mary's been wanting Miss O'Rourke's recipe for those biscuits. Be a shame if something happened before she could share it. The standoff stretched taut as wire. Morrison's men looked uncertain now, outnumbered and outflanked. Finally, Morrison spat in the dust. This ain't over, he snarled. Mr. Pike don't forget debts. Neither do we, Jack said softly. After the riders left, Maeve found herself shaking. Not from fear, she realized, but from anger, clean and bright and purposeful. Thank you, she said to Sam and the others. All of you. Sam shrugged. Been thinking about what you said, about folks standing together. Figured it was time to stop thinking and start doing. That night, Maeve couldn't settle. She paced the kitchen, mind racing with plans and possibilities. Jack found her there near midnight, standing at the window watching clouds chase across the moon. Can't sleep. Too much to think about. She turned to face him. They'll be back. Morrison, Pike, all of them. This isn't over. No, Jack agreed. It's not. Then we need to be ready. We need. She stopped, struck by her own words. When had it become we? When had she stopped thinking about leaving? Jack seemed to hear the question she didn't ask. He crossed to where she stood, maintaining the careful distance they'd both accepted as necessary. I won't let them take you, he said simply. Whatever Pike thinks he's owed. Whatever paper he waves around, you're not going anywhere you don't want to go. I can't keep hiding behind you, behind any of you. She met his eyes squarely. I need to face Pike myself. In town, in public, where there are witnesses. Maeve. No. She lifted her chin. I spent too many years letting others speak for me, make decisions for me. If I'm going to make a life here, any kind of life, it has to be on my own terms. Something shifted in Jack's expression, respect mixing with concern. Then we do it smart. Pike owns the Dry Spur Saloon. Neutral ground, but public, plenty of witnesses. When? Tomorrow's Saturday. Town will be full. Good as time as any. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Maeve dressed carefully in her one remaining Boston dress, altered now to accommodate the muscles she'd gained from ranch work. She pinned her hair up properly for the first time in weeks, studying her reflection in the small mirror. The woman looking back was familiar, yet changed sun-darkened skin, steady eyes, chin set with determination. The ride to town felt both too long and too short. Jack rode beside her, rifle across his saddle, while Sam Trujillo and several others formed a loose escort. Word had spread through the network of small ranchers and farmers Pike had pushed too hard for too long. Dusty Ford on a Saturday bustled with activity. Farmers in town for supplies, cowboys spending their pay, women shopping with children in tow. Heads turned as their group rode down Main Street, conversations dying mid-sentence. The dry spur squatted on the corner like a toad made of timber and sin. Even at midday, piano music drifted through the bat-wing doors along with the smell of tobacco and stale beer. Maeve dismounted, smoothing her skirts with hands that barely trembled.
I go in alone, she said.
Like hell, Jack growled.
Please.
She touched his arm lightly.
This is something I need to do, but stay close.
He nodded reluctantly.
We'll be right outside.
The saloon fell silent when Maeve pushed through the doors. Every head turned, taking in the proper lady in working boots, the Boston accent wrapped around steel determination. Pike sat at a corner table like a spider in his web, playing cards with 3 men she didn't recognize. Mr. Pike, her voice carried clearly across the room.
I believe we have business to discuss.
Pike set down his cards slowly, a smile playing at his thin lips. Miss O'Rourke, what a pleasant surprise. Come to your senses at last.
I've come for what's mine.
She reached into her bag, withdrawing a carefully wrapped packet.
$60. Full reimbursement for travel expenses, as outlined in your original advertisement. I'm returning your money and considering our arrangement null and void.
I'm afraid it's not that simple. Pike stood, straightening his vest. You see, there were additional costs. Housing you were supposed to receive, preparations made for your arrival, damages to my reputation when you chose to compromise yourself with another man. What housing? Maeve's voice rose. What preparations? You never even sent someone to meet me. Your word against mine. Pike's smile widened. And who do you think this town will believe, a respected businessman or a woman of questionable virtue? The slur hit its mark, but Maeve had been called worse in better parlors. Then perhaps they'll believe documentation. She withdrew another paper from her bag. Your original advertisement, Mr. Pike, from the Matrimonial Times. Nowhere does it mention additional costs or conditions. It states quite clearly, passage paid in exchange for marriage.
You broke the engagement.
You never met me. The words cracked like a whip across the saloon. You took my money and abandoned me at the station. If anyone broke faith, sir, it was you. Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Pike's face darkened. Careful, Miss O'Rourke. You're a long way from Boston society. Different rules out here.
Yes,
Maeve agreed.
Better rules, honest rules, where a person's word means something and contracts are honored.
She raised her voice to carry to every corner. I call on everyone here to witness. I'm offering full reimbursement for any legitimate expenses, Mr. Pike incurred on my behalf. I ask only for a written receipt absolving both parties of further obligation.
And if I refuse,
then I'll take the matter to the territorial authorities. I've already written to the Attorney General's office about fraudulent marriage contracts targeting Eastern women. It was a bluff she'd written no such letter, but Pike didn't need to know that. The silence stretched taut. Pike's eyes darted around the room, gauging the mood. The faces watching were carefully neutral, but Maeve caught subtle signs, a nod here, narrowed eyes there. Pike had pushed too many people too hard. They might fear him, but they were tired of it. Finally, Pike laughed a harsh, unpleasant sound. You've got sand. Lady, I'll give you that. He gestured to one of his men. Write up a receipt. Full reimbursement received. All obligations dissolved. The man scribbled on a piece of paper, which Pike signed with a flourish. He held it out to Maeve, but when she reached for it, he didn't let go immediately. You've made a mistake, he said quietly, for her ears alone. Cedar Draw can't protect you forever. Neither can Calder. I don't need protection, Maeve replied, matching his tone. I need justice. And if you continue harassing me or anyone else in this community, you'll find that Eastern women know how to make noise in all the right places. Newspapers love a scandal. Mr. Pike,
especially one involving the exploitation of innocent women. She yanked the paper from his grasp and turned on her heel, walking out with her head high, not running, not fleeing, walking like a woman who'd faced down her demon and won. Outside, Jack waited with the others, tension written in every line of his body. When he saw her emerge unharmed, something eased in his expression. "It's done," she said simply, showing him the receipt. Just like that. Just like that. Though they both knew it wasn't. Not really. Pike had been embarrassed publicly, forced to back down. Such men didn't forget. The ride back to Cedar Draw was quiet, each lost in thought. As they crested the rise overlooking the ranch, Jack finally spoke. "That was brave. Foolish, maybe, but brave." "It was necessary." Maeve tucked the receipt away carefully. "I couldn't move forward with that hanging over me." "And now?" She considered the question, looking down at the small ranch that had become more home than Boston ever was. "Now I figure out what comes next. The cooperative idea, I think we should pursue it. Mrs. Reyes was interested when I spoke to her last week. The Kowalskis, too. Going to be a fight. Pike won't stand by while folks organize against him. Then we'd better be ready." That evening, as she prepared supper, Maeve found herself humming something she hadn't done since leaving Boston. Jack came in from checking the animals, pausing in the doorway at the sound. "What's that tune?" She blushed, realizing she'd been caught. "Something my mother used to sing, about finding home in unexpected places." He crossed to the stove, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "And have you found home?" She turned to face him, ladle still in hand. "I think maybe I have, or at least I've found where I want to build one." His hand came up slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, she stood still as he cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Maeve," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I know," she whispered. "I'm not ready either. Not yet, but someday." "Someday," he agreed, and she heard it for what it was, a promise. Not of possession or protection, but of possibility. He stepped back, the moment passing but not breaking. There would be time, she thought. Time to heal, time to trust, time to build something real and lasting. For now, it was enough to stand in the warm kitchen, preparing a simple meal, knowing she'd chosen her ground and defended it. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but inside Cedar Draw, there was light and warmth and the quiet strength of two people learning to hope again. The fight with Pike wasn't over, might never truly be over, but she'd proven something today. To the town and to herself. She was no longer running from her past or hiding from her future. She was standing her ground, and that made all the difference. The cold snap arrived without warning, turning the October night into something that belonged to deep winter. Maeve woke to find frost painting the windows and her breath visible in the air. From the main room, she could hear Jack stoking the fire, trying to coax more heat from the meager wood supply. "We'll need to bring the livestock closer," he said when she emerged, wrapped in a shawl. "This kind of cold can kill the weak ones." They worked through the morning, driving sheep and the few cattle into the sheltered areas near the barn. The animals sensed the danger in the weather, clustering together for warmth. By noon, the temperature had dropped further, and the wind carried the bite of something more serious than a passing cold front. "I've never seen it this cold this early," Maeve said, her teeth chattering despite the layers she wore. "Happens sometimes," Jack replied, but she caught the worry in his eyes. "We'll need more firewood. What we've got won't last 2 days." They spent the afternoon splitting and stacking wood, racing against the falling temperature. As the sun began its descent, painting the frozen landscape in shades of amber and rose, Jack made a decision. "We'll need to share the main room tonight. Can't heat both ends of the house in this cold." Maeve nodded,
Practical necessity overcoming any lingering propriety, they moved her bedding near the fireplace, creating a makeshift sleeping area that would conserve heat. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted further. They ate a simple supper of beans and cornbread, huddled close to the fire. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, finding every crack in the walls. Despite the fire, cold seeped in from all sides. "Tell me about Boston winters," Jack said, trying to distract them both from their chattering teeth. "Different," Maeve admitted. "Cold, yes, but we had coal furnaces, sealed windows. Here it's like the cold has teeth." They piled every blanket in the house near the fire. But it wasn't enough. Sometime past midnight, Maeve woke to find the fire burning low and Jack trying to quietly add wood without waking her. "You're shivering," she observed. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. They neither of them were. The cold was beyond what either had prepared for, dangerous in its intensity. Maeve made a decision that would have scandalized her Boston society friends. "We need to share warmth," she said quietly. It's survival, Jack." He hesitated, understanding the trust she was offering. Then he nodded, moving his bedroll next to hers. They lay back to back at first, sharing blankets and body heat while maintaining a careful distance. But as the night wore on and the cold deepened, that distance naturally closed. By dawn, they were pressed close together, her back against his chest, his arm draped protectively across her waist. Maeve woke first, aware of every point of contact, of the steady rhythm of his breathing against her neck. She should have felt panic, should have pulled away. Instead, she felt safe. "Morning," Jack murmured, awake but not moving. "Morning," she whispered back. They lay there for a moment longer, acknowledging without words that something fundamental had shifted. Then, by mutual agreement, they rose to face the day. The cold had broken sometime near dawn, leaving them exhausted but oddly exhilarated. As they went about morning chores, there was a new ease between them, walls torn down by simple human need. "Thank you," Maeve said as they fed the chickens, "for being respectful." Jack paused in scattering grain. "You trusted me. That means something." "Yes," she agreed. "It does." That afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Mrs. Reyes arrived in her wagon, accompanied by Father Malloy and, surprisingly, the Kowalski brothers. They gathered in the kitchen, warming their hands around cups of coffee. "We've been talking," Mrs. Reyes began without preamble, "about what you said, Miss O'Rourke, about standing together. Pike's called in 3 more loans this week," Stephen Kowalski added, his accent thick with emotion. "The Millers, the Johnsons, and old Pete Harper. 60 years Pete's worked that land." "What can we do?" Maeve asked, leaning forward. Father Malloy cleared his throat. "I've written to the bishop, expressing concerns about certain business practices in our community. He has connections in Santa Fe, possibly even Washington. And I've been keeping records," Mrs. Reyes added. "Every forced sale, every called loan. Pike's been careful, but patterns emerge." They talked through the afternoon, plans taking shape, a cooperative store, where people could trade goods and services without cash, a fund to help families facing foreclosure. Letters to newspapers in the East, exposing Pike's treatment of settlers. "He'll fight," Jack warned. "Hard and dirty. Then we fight back," Mrs. Reyes said firmly. "Clean and together." After they left, Maeve stood at the window, watching their wagons disappear into the distance. "It's really happening?" she said wonderingly. "People are standing up." "Because you showed them how," Jack said from behind her. She turned to face him. "We showed them. I couldn't have done any of this without you." He crossed to her, movements careful and deliberate. "Maeve, about last night." "I know we agreed to be careful," she interrupted,
to take time, and we should. But Jack, she took a breath, gathering courage. I'm not afraid anymore. Not of you, not of possibilities. He reached out slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was becoming familiar, a quiet intimacy they'd allowed themselves. I never expected this, he admitted. Never thought I'd feel whole again. Neither did I. She caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. Charles tried to break something in me. For a long time, I thought he'd succeeded. But being here, working beside you, building something real, I found myself again. A stronger self. You were always strong, Jack said. You just needed room to show it. They stood there, hands linked, hearts full of unspoken promises. Then, as if by agreement, they stepped apart, not retreating, just acknowledging that some things were worth doing right. That evening brought news that would test their newfound resolve. Eli Hart arrived just after sunset, his young face grave with worry. There's been a fire, he said breathlessly. The Trujillo place. Barn's gone, along with their winter feed. Lightning, Jack asked, though they all knew there had been no storms. Eli shook his head. Sam saw riders leaving. Morrison's boys. He thinks. The war had begun. They rode out at first light, wagon loaded with what supplies they could spare. The scene at the Trujillo ranch was heartbreaking. The barn reduced to blackened timbers, smoke still rising from the ruins. Sam stood among the ashes, his weathered face set in hard lines. Lost everything, he said simply. Feed, tools, tack. Without it, we can't make it through winter. But as the morning wore on, wagons began arriving. The Kowalskis brought lumber salvaged from their own building projects. Father Malloy came with a group of townspeople, tools in hand. Even some who had been neutral in the conflict with Pike showed up, understanding that if it could happen to the Trujillos, it could happen to them. We'll rebuild, Stefan Kowalski declared, bigger and better than before. They worked through the day, turning tragedy into defiance. Maeve organized the women in preparing food for the workers, while Jack helped raise the first new beams. By sunset, the skeleton of a new barn stood against the sky. It's not just a barn. Mrs., Reyes said quietly to Maeve. It's a message. We won't be broken. That night, exhausted and filthy, Jack and Maeve returned to Cedar Draw. As they tended their own evening chores, a comfortable silence settled between them, born of shared purpose and growing trust. Morrison will come for us next, Jack said as they prepared a simple meal. Probably. Maeve set plates on the table with steady hands. Are you worried? About the ranch, yes, about you. He met her eyes, terrified. The honesty of it took her breath. Jack. I can face losing everything else, he continued. The land, the cattle, all of it. But not you. Not when I've just found you. She crossed to him then, throwing caution to the wind. Her hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You won't lose me. Whatever comes, we face it together. Maeve. No. Her voice was fierce. I've run before. From Charles. From Boston. From myself. I won't run again. This is my home now. You are my home. He crushed her against him then. Not in passion, but in promise. They held each other in the lamplit kitchen, two souls who had found their way through darkness to this moment of light. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing unsteadily. Jack rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. When this is over, he said roughly, when Pike's dealt with and we can breathe again. Yes, she whispered, understanding the unspoken question. Yes. They stepped apart then, the moment too precious to rush. There would be time. They promised themselves. After the fight was won, after the dust settled, after they could come together as whole people,
not broken pieces seeking shelter. The next morning brought smoke on the horizon, not the Trujillo place this time, but the direction of the Harper farm. The war Pike had started was spreading, but so was the resistance. As Maeve watched Jack saddle up to ride to Harper's aid, she felt no fear, only determination. Pike thought he could break them with fire and threats. He didn't understand that he was only forging them into something stronger. "Be careful," she called as Jack mounted up. He touched his hat brim, a gesture that had become their private language. "Always am. Keep the rifle handy." She nodded, watching him ride away. Then she turned back to the house, to the ledgers and letters that were her weapons in this fight. They would win this war not with violence, but with truth, community, and the unbreakable bonds they were building. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear hammers ringing as neighbors rebuilt what Pike had tried to destroy. The sound was like a heartbeat, steady, strong, unstoppable. Change was coming to Dusty Ford, and Maeve O'Rourke, who had once fled Boston in shame and fear, stood ready to help lead it. The acrid smell of smoke still clung to the morning air when Maeve heard the midnight visitors. She'd been lying awake, unable to shake the image of the Harper farm in flames, when the soft nicker of horses brought her fully alert. Through the window, she could see shadows moving near the barn, too many to be Jack returning alone. She grabbed the rifle Jack had taught her to use, checking the load with steady hands. The lessons had seemed abstract then, targets and technique. Now, with her heart hammering against her ribs, the weight of the weapon felt very real. The kitchen door creaked open before she could decide whether to confront the intruders or wait for Jack. But it was Mrs. Reyes who slipped inside, followed by several shapes in the darkness. "It's us, child. Mrs. Reyes whispered. "Don't shoot." Maeve lowered the rifle, hands shaking with relief. "What are you doing here?" "Bringing help." The older woman gestured to her companions as they filed in, the Kowalski brothers. Sam Trujillo, Father Malloy, and, surprisingly, Jacob Henderson from the general store. "My barn's next," Henderson said without preamble, his usual pompous manner replaced by fear. "Morrison was in the store today, asking about my loan payments, making threats." "So you've decided to join us?" Maeve couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Henderson had been one of Pike's most reliable supporters, extending credit only to those Pike approved. "I've decided I'd rather keep my store than Pike's favor." Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Reyes says you have a plan." They gathered around the kitchen table, voices low and urgent. The cooperative they'd discussed was no longer a future dream, it was an immediate necessity. "We pool resources," Maeve explained, spreading out the ledgers she'd been working on. "Goods, services, even labor. Create our own economy that doesn't depend on Pike's credit." "The territorial attorney arrives next week," Father Malloy added. "My bishop arranged it. James Whitcomb, he has a reputation for standing up to men like Pike." The sound of approaching horses cut short their planning. Everyone froze, hands moving to weapons, until Jack's familiar whistle echoed across the yard. He entered with two other men, their clothes singed and faces grim. "Harper's place is gone," he reported. "We saved the house, but the barn, the livestock—" He shook his head. "Pete's talking about going back east." "No." Maeve stood, fire in her eyes. "That's what Pike wants, to drive us out one by one. We don't give him that satisfaction." "Easy to say when it's not your life's work in ashes," one of Harper's hands said bitterly. "You're right." Maeve's voice softened. "I haven't lost what you have, but I've lost other things. My reputation, my sense of safety, my faith in justice." She looked around the room, meeting each gaze. "We've all lost something to men like Pike. The question is, do we let him take everything? Or do we fight?" Sam Trujillo spoke up. "My barn stands because you all came to help." Maybe it's time we made that official. A mutual aid society? Pike burns one barn. We build two.
He's got the sheriff in his pocket,
Henderson warned. Temporary sheriff? Father Malloy corrected. Elections are coming. Perhaps it's time for a change there, too. They talked until dawn, plans crystallizing with each passing hour. By the time the sun painted the eastern sky pink, they had the framework of resistance, a cooperative store, a mutual aid fund, even a candidate for sheriff in Sam's eldest son, Miguel, who'd served as a deputy in Texas. As the group prepared to leave, Maeve pulled Henderson aside. Why now? Why risk Pike's anger after all this time? The merchant looked older in the morning light, shoulders bowed with more than fatigue. My daughter's getting married next month. Her young man works the Martinez ranch. Pike holds the note on that, too. He met her eyes. A man reaches a point where he's got to choose what matters most, profit or people. Took me too long to figure that out. After they left, Jack and Maeve stood in the kitchen, exhaustion and exhilaration warring in their faces.
It's really happening,
she said wonderingly. Pike won't stand for it. Jack's voice was grim. This will get worse before it gets better. As if summoned by his words, dust rose on the horizon. Riders, moving fast. Maeve counted 7 horses. Her stomach clenched as she recognized Morrison's bulky form in the lead. Get inside, Jack ordered, checking his rifle. No. Maeve grabbed the shotgun from its place by the door. We stand together. The riders thundered into the yard, but Jack and Maeve weren't alone. Sam Trujillo emerged from behind the barn where he'd been waiting, rifle ready. The Kowalski brothers appeared from the other direction. Word of the dawn meeting had spread. Neighbors were watching out for each other. Morrison pulled up short, clearly not expecting resistance. Quite the welcoming committee. Calder. State your business and move on, Jack replied evenly. Mr. Pike wants to make something clear. Morrison's pig eyes fixed on Maeve. Anybody interfering with legitimate business operations might find themselves facing charges. Conspiracy, theft, even sedition. Federal marshals don't look kindly on agitators. Is that a threat? Maeve asked, voice carrying clearly. It's a friendly warning. Morrison's smile was anything but friendly. You're new here, lady. Maybe you don't understand how things work. Mr. Pike owns most of this valley, the stores, the mill, even the water rights. Cross him, and you'll find life gets mighty uncomfortable. Uncomfortable like having your barn burned, Sam Trujillo called out. Or just uncomfortable like being run off land your family's worked for generations. Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun, but thought better of it when rifle barrels swung his direction. You people are making a mistake. Mr. Pike's been patient, but that's wearing thin. Good, Maeve said clearly, because so is ours. The standoff stretched taut until Morrison finally wheeled his horse around. Remember what I said? Federal marshals take a dim view of troublemakers. After they left, Jack turned to Maeve with something like awe. You surely do poke the bear, don't you? Someone has to. But her hands were trembling now that the danger had passed. That night, they worked side by side, updating ledgers and writing letters. The lamp burned low as they documented every burned barn, every called loan, every family driven from their land. Evidence. Whitcomb would need evidence. My hand's cramping, Maeve said finally, setting down her pen. Jack looked up from his own writing. Take a break. We've done enough for tonight. But she didn't move away. Instead, she watched him work, noting the way the lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, the careful precision of his worn hands. What? He asked, feeling her gaze. I was thinking about that first night, how you stood guard on the porch, watching over a stranger. You weren't a stranger. You were a lady in need of help. I was a burden, an unwanted complication in your ordered life. Jack set down his pen, giving her his full attention. Is that what you think? It's what I thought then. Now, she smiled softly. Now I think maybe I was exactly where I needed to be. He stood slowly, crossing to where she sat. Maeve, I need to tell you something. About Morrison's threat if the federal marshals come. If Pike makes good on his warnings. I want you to distance yourself from me. Say I forced you to stay, that you had no choice.
Stop!
She rose too, facing him squarely.
Don't you dare try to protect me by pushing me away.
I'm trying to keep you safe. I don't want to be safe if it means losing you. The words hung between them, raw and honest. I've been safe. Safe was a prison dressed up in silk and proper manners. Safe was letting others decide my life because fighting back wasn't ladylike. She stepped closer, close enough to see the war in his eyes between honor and desire. I choose danger if it means standing beside you. I choose uncertain tomorrows over secure loneliness. I choose you, Jack Calder, with all your shadows and scars. His control broke. He pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair as his mouth found hers. It wasn't gentle. Too much fear and longing had built up for gentleness. It was desperate and fierce and absolutely right. When they finally drew apart, both were breathing hard. Jack rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. I'm no good at pretty words, he said roughly, but you've got to know you've given me back something I thought was dead: hope, purpose, the ability to feel anything beyond duty and regret. Jack, let me finish. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I love you, Maeve O'Rourke, not because you need protecting or because you're beautiful, though God knows you are. I love you because you're the strongest, bravest, most stubborn woman I've ever met, because you make me want to be better than I am. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. I love you too, even when you're being an overprotective fool. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. Especially then. Especially then. They kissed again. Softer this time, a seal on promises made. When they parted, it was with the understanding that everything had changed and nothing had. They still had battles to fight, a community to protect, a life to build. But now they would do it together, not as two damaged souls seeking shelter, but as partners who had chosen each other. A sound outside broke the moment horses again, but moving slowly. Jack grabbed his rifle while Maeve checked the window. It's Miguel Trujillo, she said, recognizing Sam's son. And he's hurt. They rushed outside to find Miguel slumped in his saddle, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his arm. Ambush, he gasped as Jack helped him down. On the road from town. Morrison's boys. They knew about the meeting. How? Jack demanded while Maeve ran for medical supplies. Henderson. Miguel's face was gray with pain and anger. Saw him leaving Pike's office just before they jumped me. He sold us out. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Henderson, who had sat at their table that very morning, promising support. Henderson, who knew all their plans. Or Pike threatened him worse than we did, Maeve said quietly, returning with bandages and whiskey. His daughter's wedding, remember? As she tended Miguel's wound a graze. Thankfully, though painful, her mind raced. If Pike knew their plans, if he had proof of their organizing. We need to move faster, she said, before Pike can bring in federal marshals or manufacture evidence against us. Move how? Jack asked. We take the fight public, really public. Those Eastern newspapers Father Malloy mentioned, it's time to use them. She tied off the bandage with efficient movements. Pike's power comes from operating in shadows. Time to shine some light. Miguel winced as he tested his arm. My father's already moving the families most at risk to safer ground. But Miss O'Rourke's right. We can't just defend anymore. Tomorrow, Jack decided. We meet again, but somewhere Pike won't expect. The old mission ruins. Spread the word to those we trust, really trust. After Miguel left, They secured the house and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Too much had happened. Too much had changed. They lay in their separate spaces, hyper-aware of each other's presence. Finally, Maeve spoke into the darkness.
"Jack, are you awake?"
"Yes."
"I'm scared."
She heard him shift. Then his footsteps crossing the room. He sat on the floor beside her makeshift bed, back against the wall. "So am I," he admitted, but not of Pike or Morrison or even federal marshals. What then? His hand found hers in the darkness. "Of losing this, of waking up to find it was all a dream, of not being the man you think I am." She squeezed his fingers. "You're exactly the man I think you are. Flawed and haunted and trying so hard to do right. That's what I love, not some perfect hero. But you." They stayed that way until dawn, hands linked, drawing strength from each other. When the sun finally rose, painting the desert in shades of gold and possibility, they were ready to face whatever came. The war for Dusty Ford was entering a new phase, but they would meet it together, united by love and purpose and the unshakable belief that right could triumph over might. Pike had awakened something he couldn't control: a community's courage and two hearts that refused to be broken. The price of that miscalculation would be higher than he could imagine. The Dry Spur Saloon had never seen a crowd like this. Every chair was filled, men standing along the walls, and even some of the town's women had come, a shocking breach of propriety that spoke to the gravity of the moment. Bartholomew Pike had called this public meeting to address what he termed lawless agitation in the community, but he'd badly miscalculated the mood of the room. Maeve stood near the back, Jack beside her, feeling the tension that crackled through the air like lightning before a storm. 3 days had passed since Miguel's ambush, 3 days of careful planning and quiet organizing. Now it all came down to this. Pike stood at the front, flanked by Morrison and 2 men she didn't recognize, hired guns from their appearance. The temporary sheriff, Tom Brewster, lurked nearby, badge tarnished and loyalty bought. "Gentlemen," Pike began, his voice carrying that false, reasonable tone she'd come to despise. "And ladies, we have a situation that requires addressing. Certain elements in our community have been spreading lies, making accusations, even threatening the peace and prosperity we've all worked so hard to build." "Whose prosperity?" Sam Trujillo called out from the side. "Yours or ours?" Pike's smile never wavered. "The prosperity of lawful citizens who honor their debts and contracts, not those who would form illegal conspiracies to avoid their rightful obligations. Like burning barns, Mrs." Reyes stood up, her dignity unshakable despite Pike's glare. "Is that a rightful obligation?" "I know nothing of any fires," Pike replied smoothly. "But I do know that federal marshals take a dim view of sedition, of groups organizing to undermine legitimate business operations." This was the moment they'd prepared for. Maeve stepped forward, and the crowd parted to let her through. She carried a leather portfolio, and her hands were steady as she faced Pike. "Mr. Pike," she said, her Boston accent cutting through the murmur of voices. "Since you've called us here to discuss legitimate business operations, perhaps we should examine yours." "I don't believe I asked for your opinion, Miss O'Rourke." "No, but the territorial attorney might." She opened the portfolio, withdrawing a document. "Mr. James Whitcomb has asked me to read this statement." Pike's composure cracked slightly. "Whitcomb, dear citizens of Dusty Ford," Maeve read, her voice clear and carrying. "I have received numerous complaints regarding business practices in your community. After preliminary investigation, I will be arriving within the week to conduct formal inquiries into allegations of fraud, coercion, and racketeering. Any attempts to intimidate witnesses or destroy evidence will be met with the full force of territorial and federal law." The room erupted. Pike's face had gone from red to white, while Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun. Sheriff Brewster looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Furthermore, Maeve continued over the noise. I have been in communication with several Eastern newspapers regarding a disturbing pattern of mail-order bride fraud targeting vulnerable women. The Boston Herald, in particular, is very interested in this story. Enough. Pike slammed his hand on the bar. This is nothing but lies and threats from a fallen woman who couldn't honor a simple contract. Which contract would that be? Maeve pulled out another paper. The one where you promised to meet me at the station, or perhaps the receipts showing you collected money from 12 other women over the past 2 years, none of whom ever received the marriages they were promised. The crowd's murmur turned angry. Many had sisters, daughters, cousins back east. The idea of Pike preying on desperate women hit close to home. You have no proof. I have letters. Maeve's voice cut like steel. From Miss Anna Swanson of Philadelphia, Miss Claire Dubois of New York, Miss Margaret O'Brien of Baltimore. Would you like me to read them? They paint quite a picture of your legitimate business operations. Jack stepped forward then, positioning himself slightly between Maeve and Morrison. Seems to me, Pike, you've got 2 choices. You can work with the community to make things right, or you can wait for Whitcomb and explain yourself to federal authorities. And what would making things right entail? Pike's voice was dangerous now, all pretense of reasonableness gone. Father Malloy stood up. Forgive the debts of families burned out by mysterious fires. Return the deeds to those forced off their land through manufactured defaults, and cease all harassment of those organizing legitimate cooperative businesses. In exchange, Sam Trujillo added, we don't pursue federal charges. You keep your ranch, your saloon, your legitimate holdings, but the stranglehold on this community ends today. Pike looked around the room, calculating odds. The hired guns beside him were outnumbered 20-1. Sheriff Brewster had quietly moved away from Pike's side. Even Morrison looked uncertain. You people don't understand, Pike said, desperation creeping into his voice. Without credit, without organization, this town dies. I built this place. No. Henderson stepped out of the crowd, surprising everyone. We built this place, with sweat and hope and helping each other through hard times. You just put your name on it and charged us for the privilege. The betrayal in Pike's eyes when he saw Henderson was almost pitiful. You, after everything I've done for you. After everything you've threatened to take away. You mean? Henderson's voice was steady. My daughter gets married tomorrow. Pike. And by God, she'll do it on land her husband's family owns free and clear. The room held its breath. This was the moment of decision. Balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one sudden move, and violence would erupt. It was Maeve who broke the tension, her voice calm and authoritative. Mr. Pike, I'll make you a personal offer. Return my travel expenses and those of the other women you've defrauded. And I won't pursue mail fraud charges that could land you in federal prison. The money can go into the community fund to help those whose barns were burned. And if I refuse? Then, tomorrow morning, telegrams go out to newspapers in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington. By week's end, your name will be synonymous with the exploitation of innocent women. Is your pride worth that? Pike's jaw worked silently. Rage and calculation warring in his eyes. Finally. His shoulders slumped slightly, the first sign of defeat anyone had ever seen from him. Terms, he said grudgingly. Put your terms in writing. What followed was 3 hours of negotiation, with Father Malloy serving as mediator. By the end, Pike had agreed to forgive debts totaling thousands of dollars, return 6 deeds, and pay restitution to the defrauded women. In return, the community would not pursue federal charges, and the Eastern newspapers would not receive their stories. As people began to file out, subdued but victorious, Morrison made one last attempt at intimidation. He blocked Maeve's path, his bulk looming over her. This ain't over, woman. Mr. Pike might have rolled over, but some of us remember who our friends are. Jack's hand went to his gun, but Maeve touched his arm, stopping him. She looked up at Morrison.
no fear in her eyes. "You're right," she said clearly. "It's not over. It's just beginning. And if one more barn burns, if one more family is threatened, those telegrams go out anyway. Are we clear?" Morrison's face twisted, but before he could respond, Miguel Trujillo and 5 other young men surrounded them. The message was clear. The community stood together now. Morrison spat on the floor and stalked away, his departure marking the true end of Pike's reign of fear. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles but somehow comforting in their constancy. The crowd dispersed slowly, people stopping to shake hands, to embrace, to marvel at what they'd accomplished. "You were magnificent," Jack said quietly as they walked toward their horses. "I've never seen anything like it." Maeve leaned against him briefly, exhaustion hitting now that the adrenaline was fading. "I was terrified the entire time." "Couldn't tell. You stood there like you were born to face down bullies." "Maybe I was." She thought of Charles, of all the subtle cruelties she'd endured in silence. "I just needed to find my voice." They were almost to the horses when James Whitcomb himself stepped out of the shadows. The territorial attorney was younger than Maeve had expected, with sharp eyes and a law clerk's precision in his movements. "Miss O'Rourke," he said, touching his hat. "Mr. Calder, that was well done." "You're early," Jack observed. "I've been in town 2 days, gathering information quietly." Whitcomb smiled slightly. "Your letter was very detailed. Miss O'Rourke, I particularly appreciated the documentation." "Will Pike's agreement hold?" Maeve asked. "With community pressure and the threat of federal investigation, I believe so. Men like Pike are bullies at heart. Once stood up to, they often crumble." He paused. "You've done something remarkable here. Communities rarely find the courage to unite like this." "We had good leaders," Jack said, his hand finding Maeve's. Whitcomb noticed the gesture and smiled more broadly. "Indeed. I'll be staying for the Henderson wedding tomorrow. I think my presence might help ensure Mr. Pike remembers his new commitments." After Whitcomb left, Jack and Maeve rode home in companionable silence. The moon had risen, turning the desert silver and strange. Cedar Draw appeared before them like a promise kept, small but solid in the vast landscape. "Stay," Jack said suddenly as they dismounted. "I'm not going anywhere." "No, I mean—" He took a breath. "Stay forever. Marry me, not because you need protection or because it's proper, but because I can't imagine facing another morning without you beside me." Maeve's heart stopped, then raced. "Jack Calder, are you proposing to me in a barn?" "I'm proposing to you under the stars, on the land we've fought for, after watching you take down the biggest bully in the territory." His hands cupped her face gently. "Seems like the perfect place and time to me." She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, of course, yes." He kissed her then, sweet and deep and full of promise. When they drew apart, both were grinning like fools. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow. At the Henderson wedding, might as well give Father Malloy double duty." "Tomorrow," she agreed, then laughed again. "I need to tell Mrs. Reyes. She'll want to arrange food and—" "Maeve," his voice was gentle, "it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be us." She nodded, understanding. They'd already had their trial by fire. Everything else was just celebration. They tended the horses together, checked the chickens, banked the fire, all the small necessary tasks that made up ranch life. But tonight, every mundane chore felt sacred, infused with the promise of all the nights to come. As they prepared for bed still in separate rooms for one more night, Maeve paused in her doorway. "Jack." "Yeah. Thank you for seeing who I could be before I saw it myself." His smile was soft in the lamplight. "Right back at you, Boston." She laughed at the nickname.
closing her door on this last night of sleeping alone. Tomorrow would bring a wedding, a new beginning, and the hard work of building the community they'd fought for. But tonight, she fell asleep smiling, dreaming of strong hands and green eyes and a life built on love instead of fear. The battle for Dusty Ford was won. The battle for their future had just begun. The morning of the double wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline sky that made the desert seem infinite with possibility. The first drops of rain in months had fallen during the night, not enough to break the drought, but enough to settle the dust and bring the sharp scent of sage to the air. Maeve stood before the small mirror in what had been her room at Cedar Draw, wearing her altered Boston dress one last time. Mrs. Reyes had worked miracles with it overnight, adding touches of local lace and adjusting the fit to accommodate the stronger woman Maeve had become. "You look beautiful, Mija," Mrs. Reyes said, putting the final pin in Maeve's hair, like a woman who knows her own mind. "I feel—" Maeve searched for words. "Complete, not because I'm getting married, but because I'm choosing it, choosing him, choosing this life." A knock at the door interrupted them. "Maeve?" Jack's voice, uncertain. "I know it's bad luck, but—" She opened the door. Tradition be damned. He stood there in his best shirt, which meant the one with the fewest men's, holding a small wooden box. "This was my mother's," he said, offering it to her. Inside lay a simple gold ring, worn smooth by years. "It's not fancy. It's perfect." She kissed him quickly, not caring that Mrs. Reyes was watching with knowing eyes. "Everything about today is perfect." The wedding was held in the small chapel at the edge of town, its adobe walls still bearing scorch marks from an old Apache raid. The whole community had gathered, transforming the humble space into something magical with wildflowers and whatever finery they could muster. Catherine Henderson went first, radiant as she married her Thomas Martinez under her father's finally approving eye. Henderson had aged years in days, but stood straighter than he had in months, free of Pike's shadow. Then it was Maeve's turn. She walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away because she was giving herself, freely and gladly. Jack waited at the altar, Sam Trujillo standing as his best man, and the look in his eyes made her feel like she was coming home. Father Malloy performed the ceremony with gentle efficiency, understanding that the words mattered less than the commitment they represented. When Jack slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, Maeve felt the last walls around her heart crumble. "I, Jackson Samuel Calder, take you, Maeve Elizabeth O'Rourke, to be my wife, to stand beside you in drought and plenty, in conflict and peace, to respect your strength, honor your choices, and love you with all that I am and all that I hope to be. I, Maeve Elizabeth O'Rourke, take you, Jackson Samuel Calder, to be my husband, to build alongside you in hope and hardship, in sorrow and joy, to trust your heart, share your burdens, and love you with every sunrise until my last sunset." The kiss that sealed their union was tender, a promise of all the kisses to come. The chapel erupted in cheers, and even James Whitcomb applauded from his position by the door, a subtle reminder of the law's presence. The celebration moved to the town square, where tables groaned under the weight of everyone's contributions. It wasn't fancy beans and cornbread, venison stew, precious preserved fruits, but it was community, and that made it a feast. As the afternoon wore on, Maeve found herself watching Jack across the square. He was deep in conversation with Miguel Trujillo about the upcoming sheriff's election, but he kept glancing her way, as if reassuring himself she was real. "He's a good man," a voice said beside her. She turned to find Whitcomb, cup of punch in hand, troubled past, but a good man. "I know about Washita," Maeve said quietly. "It doesn't define him." "No," Whitcomb agreed. "What we do after our failures defines us. He spent 3 years trying to build something clean here. Now, with you, he might actually succeed." We'll succeed together. The whole community.
Whitcomb smiled. That's what Pike never understood. He thought fear was stronger than hope. You've proven him wrong. As evening approached, the newlyweds finally managed to slip away. The ride back to Cedar Draw was different this time, not two separate people sharing space, but a unit, a family.
Welcome home, Mrs. Calder, Jack said as they dismounted.
I've been home for months, she replied.
Now it's just official. They went through the evening chores together as they had so many times before, but everything felt new. When Jack's hand brushed hers as they fed the chickens, it was allowed to linger. When Maeve reached past him for the water bucket, he could pull her close for a moment, just because, as full dark fell, they stood on the porch, looking out at their land. In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered, not threatening now, just part of the landscape of their life. I have something to tell you, Jack said suddenly. About the mortgage. Pike called it in early. Remember, it comes due in 2 months. Maeve's happiness dimmed.
Can we pay it?
Not in cash. But Whitcomb thinks he can challenge the early call legally. And with the cooperative starting up, maybe we can work out trade agreements? He shrugged. We'll figure it out. Yes, she agreed, taking his hand. We will. They went inside, to the bedroom that would now be theirs to share. Maeve felt a flutter of the old fear as Jack closed the door. But when he turned to her, his eyes held nothing but patience and love. We don't have to, he started.
I know, she interrupted. That's why I want to.
He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to change her mind. Instead, she met him halfway. The kiss was different from all that had come before, deeper. Sure, with the knowledge that they had a lifetime to perfect it. Later, as they lay entwined in the narrow bed that somehow didn't feel narrow at all, Maeve traced the scars on Jack's chest, some from war, some from ranch work, all part of the man she loved.
No more sleeping on the porch,
she teased gently. Not unless you kick me out for snoring.
Do you snore?
Guess we'll find out. She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. I love you, Jack called her. Love you back? Maeve Calder. The name sent a thrill through her, not because it marked her as belonging to someone, but because it marked her choice to belong with someone. Morning came too soon, bringing with it reality. There was work to be done. There was always work on a ranch. But as they moved through their tasks, Maeve noticed the differences. The hands that helped her with the water bucket lingered. The thank you for breakfast came with a kiss. The 1,000 small intimacies of married life began to weave themselves into their routine. Eli Hart arrived just after noon with a telegram that had come through the stage office. Maeve's hands shook slightly as she opened it, fearing bad news. Instead, she found herself laughing. What is it? Jack asked, concerned. It's from Anna Swanson, one of the women Pike defrauded. She's a journalist. The Philadelphia Inquirer wants to hire me as a correspondent, reporting on life in the territories. They'll pay for articles about building communities, about women's experiences out here. Jack whooped, picking her up and spinning her around while Eli grinned at their joy. That's wonderful. The money will help with the mortgage. Maeve finished. Yes, but more than that, it means our story gets told. Other women will read it and know they have choices. Other communities will see what's possible when people stand together. That evening, they had their first guests as a married couple. Sam and Mary Trujillo came by with a wedding gift, a young heifer from their rebuilt herd. For the future, Sam said simply. As the weeks passed, changes came to Dusty Ford. The cooperative store opened in what had been an abandoned stable. Miguel Trujillo was elected sheriff by a landslide, with even some of Pike's former supporters voting for change. The burned barns were rebuilt, stronger than before. And through it all, Maeve wrote. She told the story of Mrs. Reyes, who had found her courage after years of silence, of the Kowalski brothers, who proved that immigrants could be the backbone of American communities, of Father Malloy, who understood that faith meant action, not just prayers. But mostly, she wrote about hope, about the choice to build rather than tear down, to trust rather than fear, to love rather than merely survive. One evening, as the first snows dusted the distant mountains, Jack found her at the kitchen table, pen in hand. New article? The last one about the conflict? She said, I want to end with something about the future. What future do you see? He sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. Railroads will come, she said thoughtfully. More people, more challenges. Dusty Ford will grow or die. But I think we've built something strong enough to adapt. A community that knows how to stand together. And us. She set down her pen, turning to face him fully. Children, maybe expanding the ranch, growing old together on this porch, watching sunsets and arguing about whose turn it is to feed the chickens. Sounds perfect. He kissed her, still gentle, still reverent, as if he couldn't quite believe his luck. Though it's definitely your turn with the chickens. She laughed, shoving him playfully. I distinctly remember. A distant whistle cut through their banter. They went to the porch, watching as smoke rose on the horizon. The railroad was still months away from Dusty Ford, but its approach was inevitable. Everything's going to change, Jack said quietly. Yes, Maeve took his hand, threading their fingers together. But we'll face it together. All of us. That's what communities do. As they stood there, watching the future approach across the desert, Maeve thought about the woman who had stepped off the stage all those months ago, frightened, alone, clinging to promises that turned out to be lies. That woman could never have imagined this standing strong beside a man who saw her as an equal, surrounded by a community that had chosen courage over fear. She had refused to be touched, refused to be broken by the past, but in opening herself to possibility, she had found so much more than she had ever dared to hope for. Love, yes, but also purpose. Not just a husband, but a partner. Not just a house, but a home. Not just survival, but a life worth living. The stars began to appear, one by one, in the vast western sky. Somewhere in the desert, a coyote sang its ancient song. And on the porch of Cedar Draw, two souls who had found their way through darkness stood together, facing whatever tomorrow might bring. Come inside, Jack said finally. It's getting cold. In a moment, Maeve leaned against him, savoring the peace. I want to remember this, all of it. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, chin resting on her head. We've got a lifetime of moments ahead of us. Yes, she agreed, turning in his arms to kiss him. We do. They went inside together, to their warm kitchen and their shared life, leaving the vast night to its mysteries. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, it always did. But tonight, they were home. They were together, and they were no longer afraid. The lamp burned low as they prepared for bed, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And in those shadows, if you looked carefully, you might see the outline of all the lives they would touch, all the stories yet to be written, all the hope they had kindled in a harsh land that had tried to break them and failed. The West was still wild, still dangerous, still demanding, but it was also theirs to shape, to build, to make better for those who would come after. And that, Maeve thought as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, was the greatest victory of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what resonated with you. If you enjoyed this tale of love, courage, and community in the Old West, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Night, and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means everything.